The third example for graphs coming from the news relates to fake news. We'll answer the same set of questions that we were answering for the other two examples. So here's the graph I found relating to fake news. And so you can see that this one's a bit of a strange graph. We have total Facebook engagements for the top 20 election stories. And you can see that we have one line describing the stories that came from mainstream news. And then we also have stories that came from fake news sources. So the source of the graph, I found it on an article by Timothy B. Lee at Vox.com, but the chart was originally made by Craig Silverman at BuzzFeed. So just to clarify what this graph is measuring, engagement in news articles is related to the total numbers of shares, reactions, comments for an article on Facebook. So that's what this graph is measuring. And so we'll talk about whether or not that's misleading at the end in that last part of this question. But let's start just by describing the trends. So to start with, engagement in mainstream news articles decreased during the election, or during the election cycle, I guess we could say. Before election. And we could say engagement in fake news articles increased. So fewer people were sharing and commenting on articles from mainstream news sources, and more were sharing and commenting on articles that were later proven to be fake. Minimums and maximums, well, we could say February to April had max engagement for mainstream and minimum for fake. And then by election day, mainstream reached a minimum, and fake news reached a maximum. So what story does this graph tell? The story that I think it tells is that leading up to the 2016 election of Donald Trump, fake news stories began to be more popular than mainstream news stories. And we could also say that in February, mainstream sources were still dominating. But fake news became way more popular right before the election. And you can see that that takeoff really began after July. So I decided to calculate the rate of change for the decline in mainstream news sources. So I fit my best fit line there and then found the rise and run of that line. So the rise is actually a fall, and it goes from 12 million down to 7.3 million. That's estimates based on using that scale. So 7.3 minus 12 is equal to negative 4.7 million engagements. The run I found tricky to calculate here, so I basically wanted to just do it by counting. So February to October, I just counted as being equal to 9 months. And then November we don't complete. So from the beginning of February to the end of October is 9 months. But the election day happened in mid-November, so I added 0.25 to get me to November 8th. So that was a bit of an estimate as well. So that's a run of about 9.25 months. And then I could calculate the rate of change. So that's rise over run is negative 4.7 million divided by 9.25, which is about negative 0.51 million engagements per month. So that's about 500,000. So mainstream news sources were losing about 500,000 engagements per month leading up to the election. So is there anything misleading about this graph? Well, I'm just going to say that this graph is okay, but not perfect. Or not great. And the reason is that it has some things that are really good and some things that aren't so great. So good y-axis scale, for starters, uses the whole y-axis, doesn't seem to be doing any shrinking of the data that makes changes look bigger than they really are. So good y-axis scale. But one thing I'm really not happy about here is the x-axis, which is that it's just broken up really strangely, and I wish they had just listed the months as normal months. But the way the x-axis is broken up strangely, it really makes me, I don't know, it makes me suspicious a little bit. And by looking at it, you know, the spacing is reasonably close. February to April is the same stretch as May to July, and it's pretty close to the same stretch as August to Election Day, but I just don't know why they did it that way. Finally, this definition of engagement, I think that they explain that definition down here right on the graph. So I think that's a good thing, is given, but we can question whether or not that's a fair measurement of the popularity of articles, of mainstream articles. We can question its, I'm going to say its validity. So overall, I think the graph's really good. I think it's really interesting, but maybe they could have framed it in such a way as to make its meaning a little bit more clear.